and using quadratic formula. Completing the square and using quadratic formula, one of those you should have already remembered. When you're doing quadratic formula, I think most of you guys have seen that before. That I know you guys, some people actually tried using it yesterday on the quiz. I didn't say you couldn't, so I didn't really wasn't that big of a deal. But the one thing I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is something called completing the square. It really only takes about 2 examples to go through it. And once you get the examples down, the rest of it is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of craziness involved in completing the square then. Completing the square and solving using quadratic formula are 2 other ways that you are able to solve quadratic equations. Basically, it's another way you can solve for your zeros. What this does is it finds your zeros. So, completing the square. Like I said, 2 ways to do this. Here's what it looks like. You start with a problem that is x squared plus 10x minus 3 equals 0. And you're sitting there thinking, what times what's negative 3 that I can add together to get 10? What times what's negative 3? There is nothing. You cannot factor that like you would normally. So what you want to do, if that's the case, is you want to set it up the following. Was it x squared plus 10x minus 3 is 0. If you can't factor it, what you want to do is you want to create junk squared equals something. Remember, when you have junk squared equals something, you just take the square root of both sides, and all of a sudden you can solve. Remember that from 5-4 and 5-5, or 5-3, 5-4, excuse me. So what we do here is the following steps. There's only a few steps to this. Only a few. The first thing we do is move c. Now c in this case is what? Negative 3. So how do you move a negative? So we add 3 to the other side. All right, fancy. Ooh. All right, so we add 3 to the other side. Notice how I left a space here before the equal sign? Leave a little bit of a space. First thing you do, x squared plus 10x blank equals 3. Now I take half of b. Well, what's half of 10? 5. Okay. Square it. What's 5 squared? It's 25. All right, now, add that to both sides. What you're doing here is you're creating a perfect square on the left side. By adding 25 to both sides, you're keeping the equation itself balanced. You're adding the same to both sides. And now notice, you've created a perfect square trinomial on the left. What times what's 25 you add together to get 10? 5 and 5. Yes, sir?
How come you're allowed to just divide the 10 by 2?
That's the rule for doing completing the square. The rule is you always take half of b, square it, add it to both sides. That's how you complete the square. So now what happens is you get the following. X squared, or excuse me, the quantity x plus 5 quantity squared equals 28. And now think about how we solve those in section 5.3 and 5.4. What do? You just take the square root of both sides. What you're doing is you're setting yourself up for a problem that you guys already know how to do. Square root of junk squared is? Junk. So this is x plus 5. What happens when you take what happens when you take a square root over an equal sign?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus, very good.
2/7.
2 root 7, excellent. And now what do I do with that 5?
Minus.
Subtract it, very good. So you get x equals negative 5 plus or minus 2 root 7. And that's how you complete the square. Half of b, square it, add it to both sides. Okay? Not that bad, is it? Just remember, how you start it, half of b, square it, add that to both sides. One thing I want you to notice, too, is when you take half of b, do you notice what half of b became? It became your term in the jump squared.
But can you just skip that step?
Well, you still got to square it and add both sides. I'm just showing you. So if you forget what goes in the parentheses, it's always your half of b goes in the parentheses. Okay. Let me show you another one. Same idea. Actually, I didn't have to have all this with one. Whatever. We have x squared minus 16x plus 76. And let's say I don't know what times what 76 did I add together to get negative 16. Let's say it's not factorable. Maybe it is factorable. I don't know. Oh, by the way, this does work if things are factorable and you just don't want to factor. This is another way to do it. You can do this every time. Okay. First step you have to do here is what? Subtract the 76. So you wind up with negative 16x, x squared minus 16x equals negative 76. So what's half of negative 16? Negative 8, good. So half of negative 16 is negative 8. Negative 8 squared is 64, positive 64. So then you add the 64 to both sides. And now notice, I have a negative 16 and a positive 64, which means my term had been negative 8. So it winds up with x minus 8 quantity squared is negative 12. Half of b squared added both sides. Okay? Half of b squared added to both sides, and now you have, move this up a little bit. What do you do now? Square root of both sides. What's the square root of jump squared? Jump. What's the square root of negative 12? 2i root 3.
Yeah, 2i root 3.
That looked like a quiz problem. And then just add the 8. Not so bad, is it? There is one trick involved with completing the square. Notice how both times here my a value was what? Well, not positive, but it was 1. Completing the square only works if your a value is 1. So there are times that if your a value isn't 1, all you have to do divide everything by the a value to make it equal to 1. That's the only rule you have to worry about. So in this case, I have 3x squared minus 6x plus 12. In order to be able to complete the square, I just have to divide everything by 3. So when I complete, I'm going to worry about these two for now. When I take care of this one, I have to divide everything out by 3, so you get x squared minus 2x plus 4 is 0. What's your first step? Subtract 4. What's half of negative 2? Square it. Bless you. Add 1 to both sides. What's your term? What times what's positive 1 you add together to get negative 2?
1.
In other words, what? Yeah, it was half of b, so it's x minus 1 quantity squared equals. You should have brought some with you, so you know how to do math today, right? Grab some paper in the back, ask somebody for a pen. What's negative 4 and 3? Negative 3. What's the square root of negative 3? Excellent. Plus or minus I root 3. So I get x minus 1 is plus or minus I root 3. And then lastly, and that's how you complete the square. You guys might have done this in algebra. I think your group might have done this. I know some of the other classes, they've never seen this before.
Mr. Solano tried to.
I think Mr. Swan tried.
Okay.
It's not
That's fine, but does this make sense? Okay. You guys can complete the square whenever you want. There's no rules when you can't use it. For me, I know there will be times I'll say use complete the square, but there are problems that say solve by any means. Complete the square always works. Some people like to use it a lot because it's really easy. Okay. And then the last thing I want to show you real quick here is quadratic formula. Do you remember what that was? What is it? Sing the song. Ready? You don't know the song? Ready? X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You do it. Ready? Come on. X equals negative b plus or minus square root. No, on this side.
B squared minus 4ac.
You guys.
over 2.
See, you think this is easy.
This is fun.
What do A, B, and C represent? A, B's, and C's are represented from the A, X squared. All that C makes you feel like you're gonna die. You go get some more, please. Remember, the A, B's, and C's just come from the coefficients from the quadratic equation. And in order to use the quadratic formula, all you're doing is working with the coefficients. I know you guys have done this. Remember, when you're using these things, when your B value is negative, make sure when you use your calculator and you square it, you're smarter than your calculator when you put it in parentheses, okay? The one thing I did want to talk about with the quadratic formula, which I'm not sure that you have seen before, is something called the discriminant. You guys ever heard of that before? What was the discriminant? You remember? No? All right. The discriminant is the jump underneath the radical. The discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac. And what that allows you to do is, if b squared minus 4ac is positive, you've got two real answers. If b squared minus 4ac is 0, you have one answer. And if b squared minus 4ac is negative, you've got two imaginary answers. That's what the discriminant allows you to see. It doesn't really go much further than that. It just, will help you decide if you have a real or an imaginary answer. That's really all that is.
Wait, so 2 answers if it's positive.
Two answers if it's positive, one answer if it's 0,
And 2 if it's
and two imaginary if it's negative. Yep, that's all it is. So if b squared minus 4ac is negative, you have imaginary answers. If it's positive, then you have, two imaginary answers. Two real. And if it equals 0, you have one real. And remember, if your discriminant equals 0, that means where does your parabola lie? If you only have one answer, where does your parabola lie on? Which axis? X or Y? Very good. That's discriminants. Like I said, when it comes down to using them, it's just going to ask you how many solutions you're going to have and what type are they. And it's just a matter of using b squared minus 4ac. Okay? Like I said, these two sections are relatively simple to show you guys as far as the formulas and setups are concerned. I'm just going to give you some problems and go from there. On Monday, we're going to go back into these, and we'll start going back into a little bit of the word problems from these last few sections. Tuesday, we will do the, is that word? Yeah, we should still be testing on Wednesday, I believe, is what it looks like. So here's what I've got for you guys to look at. Yeah, I'll write it up for you. It's x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Sorry I didn't sing it that time. You're welcome. Okay? Those are odds for everything. I gave you odds just so you guys can check your solutions. Yeah, this is all odds. What's that?
Should have R is a
Oh, sorry.
Now, what happens first? Do you take the square root or do you do squared minus one?
B squared minus 4AC. Always do that first. Order of operations tells you to go inside that first. Okay?